Well, welcome everyone to our latest episode of Guardians of the Flame. This is a series of podcasts where we're interviewing all kinds of people, people who are victims of the Troubles, peacemakers, activists, religious leaders, musicians. It's a real privilege to be in the beautiful city of Derry, Londonderry. We have to kind of technically give it the two names. We're up in this beautiful big city right on the north coast of Northern Ireland. And I'm here to interview Richard Moore. And many of you listening may have heard of Richard before, but some of you may not have, and I think you'll find his story compelling and incredibly faith-building and inspiring. So, Richard, thanks for taking the time to sit with us and to chat about your story a little bit.
Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. So, Richard, should we just start by you just telling us about your childhood in Derry? You were kind of growing up just in the early days of the Troubles. The Troubles started in 1969. Can you just trace a little bit of what your childhood would have been like up until the time when you were shot?
I was born in 1961, and at that time we lived in a house in the Craigan Estate, and the Craigan Estate is just on the hill on the west bank of the river, you know, looking over Derry really. And there was 12 children in our house, 9 boys and 3 girls. I was the second youngest, and of course obviously my mommy and daddy was there as well. And the Craigan Estate was a lovely place to live. I would describe my childhood as a very happy and pleasant childhood, you know, and I'm probably someone who remembers the Troubles, or remembers Derry before the conflict started. And I can remember out in the street playing football with my friends, playing all the games that children play, and, you know, the Craigan being a very quiet, peaceful place. I can remember the bobby on the beat. I remember the policeman patrolling the streets walking around the streets of. I remember one time grabbing our football and running with it because we didn't want the policeman to see us playing football. So I do remember that level of normality. And then what seemed like overnight for me, the Craigan became like a war zone. There were shootings, bombings, riots on a daily basis. You know, it was a really strange thing to see all the men who lived in the area, you know, all out digging up the pavements, breaking up the pavements. They use them as missiles to throw at the British Army or the police, or they build barricades. There were people going around in hijacked vehicles. There were buses, trucks, all been set on fire, you know, and everything just seemed to suddenly change. And in a strange kind of a way, it was very exciting. You know, we had a barricade at the end of our street, you know, and we had a vigilante hut at the end of our street, which was basically like a workman's shed that was put at the end of the street, and the men out of the street used to keep vigilante at night there at one stage, because the Craigan became what was officially known in those days as a no-go area. So I can remember you know, the men up there at night just keeping an eye out for the British Army or the police to make sure they weren't infiltrating the area, coming in to do raids or anything like that. So that was kind of the atmosphere. But you know, my school was just on the edge of the estate, and you know, I can remember walking to school in the mornings and everything being normal. I can remember my brother Jim used to give me a lift to school in the mornings if I got up early enough in the car, and you know, just it was all very pleasant and very peaceful place to live until, as you say, around 1969, it just all changed.
And then what I saw was that you had actually had an uncle in the Bloody Sunday, an uncle that was killed, is that right, in Bloody Sunday?
That's right.
What do you remember of, like, because one of the interviews we did, I was telling you earlier, with Liam McCluskey, you know, who would have been probably a teenager, I suppose, in those days. Do you remember, like, Bloody Sunday itself and kind of the events around that?
I do all right. I mean, most of my family went to the march on Bloody Sunday. And funny, I remember that day. I remember a couple of things about that day. First of all, I remember I was out in the street playing football, and I remember the men and women starting to walk towards Bishopsfield. And that was just further up Craigan from where I lived. So I can remember seeing everybody, starting to move towards Bishopsfield. The adults. When I'm talking about adults, I'm talking about 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, because they all look like adults to me when I was only, 10 years of age. And then I remember my sister and her boyfriend at that time took me for a run in the car, and we ended up down near the city centre, and we were actually behind the military lines. And I don't think the march had fully sort of reached the city centre or down near the Bogside at that stage, but I was still I'm behind it there, and I remember seeing people all gathered who obviously weren't at the march, and I can only assume were from, say, the other side of the community. They were gathered there behind the military lines. So I remember doing that. And then, obviously those things only become significant in hindsight. At the time, you didn't think any significance, didn't place any significance on it. But then the next thing later on that day, I was out on the street with my friends, and I spent my whole day in the street. We all did. We're all big families in the Craigan, lots of children. We just hung about together all day. And I can remember down at the end of our street, there's a place called Broadway. And as the march ended, or broke up, people began to make their way back up to the Craigan, and that would have been one of the routes and up onto the Craigan. And I remember seeing one of the men coming up, and he had tears in his eyes. And I remember him saying, "There's murder down there." Now, I don't know if the tears in his eyes were because he was upset, or it was from the CS gas that the army would have fired at the crowd. But very quickly, you began to feel this sense that something wasn't right. And later on that evening, I was out in the street, and I noticed that I saw my brother Liam arriving at the house, and he looked very serious, and he left, and he looked very serious. And where normally he would have been waving at me or smiling or whatever, he wasn't. He was literally walking with a sense of purpose, or almost like anger, towards his car. And then the big thing for me was my Uncle Wooly arrived. And my Uncle Wooly lived in Donegal, and we really only saw my Uncle Wooly at set times a year, where he come to visit. It was like a visit. Him and his wife used to come to our house to see me mommy. And I remember seeing my Uncle Wooly get into our house about, it was like twilight, so it must have been, well, maybe it was dark anyway, and it was maybe about 6 or 7 o'clock. Again, I didn't put any store on it, other than thinking, what's my Uncle Wooly doing up tonight? And then when I went into the house, my mommy was crying, and there was this sort of silence atmosphere in our living room, and the television was on, and whoever was in the house were just looking at the television. And I remember my mommy saying to me, "Your Uncle Gerard was shot today." And then it was just, there was like a waiting game going on. And it's funny, like I was only 10, but I just really felt that there were a very worried feeling in the house. And, I think my mommy and daddy were just waiting for my older brothers, to arrive home from the march, because at that stage nobody knew fully who all was shot. But the news headlines was coming in saying, there were 6 people shot dead in Derry, and then it was saying, 10 people or whatever. So as the TV was announcing the numbers, my mum and them were just sitting waiting to see what other bad news could arrive at the house,
And then you would have been, I think you were about 10 years old at that time, is that right?
I was only 10, aye.
Yeah, and then it was only just a couple of months after that you yourself were shot by a rubber bullet. Isn't that
That's right.
Yeah.
I was shot on the 4th of May, 1972. It was about 3 months after Bloody Sunday. And what I remember about that day was it was a lovely spring day, you know. And back in those days, like I went home every lunchtime. Used to have a longer lunch break at school, and I used to go home for my lunch every lunchtime. I only lived 2 minutes or 3 minutes walk from the school, really. So, and I remember being in the house at lunchtime, and my sister had just bought a new house, and my older brother, who was just above me, Gregory, he was maybe 15 or 16 at the time, years old, and he was being kept off the half day to go and help my sister in the new house. And I remember asking, could I be kept off as well? And obviously I was too young, they weren't going to keep me off, I'd be no help. And my mum and daddy said, no, you have to go back to school. So that's what I remember in terms of the build-up. Then we just got out of school as normal that day, about 3:20 in the afternoon. This is one of the entrances here to the school, the Helen Street entrance, and I would have come running out down this direction, but then went up through the football pitch of the adjoining school, because right behind me now is the primary school, but then up to my far left is the secondary school.
Okay.
And I would have went running through the football pitch there, and as we did so, I had to pass a British Army lookout post that faced into the school playground. And as I got close to the football pitch, I was about I got close to the Army lookout post. I was about 10 feet away from it when a British soldier fired a rubber bullet at us in the school playground, and it hit me here in the bridge of the nose. I lost this eye, was left completely blind on my left eye, so I'm blind now about 40 odd years, 47 years is it? I lose count sometimes, but the next thing I remember is I woke up and I was lying on the school canteen table where my music teacher, Mr. Giles Doherty, he heard the bang, he ran up and carried me and put me on the school canteen table,
Okay, wow.
I remember feeling them tugging at me, my shirt or my jumper or whatever, and I discovered afterwards they were trying to cut my school bag off me, And I remember Mr. Doherty saying to me, what's your name, son? And I told my name was Richard Moore. So for him it was pretty shocking because he knew me very well, but he wasn't able to identify me because of the extent of the injuries. My nose was completely flattened, my eyeballs were out of their sockets, and my face was just a bloody mess. And then the only other thing I remember after that, at that particular point in time, was being in the ambulance. And I remember I could hear a siren in the background, and my daddy and my sister were beside me in the ambulance,
And I remember a couple of years ago, we had the privilege of having you down in Rostrevor, our little village itself, for the Rostrevor Literary Festival that
right.
Billy Graham puts on. And I just remember hearing your story, and I was very moved by it. And you talked about just, those days afterwards and then the months, and how you began to initially, how you dealt with the fact that you now were blinded by the rubber bullet. Can you just trace a little bit of those, how your kind of perspective on it changed over the months and years?
Well, I think that, initially I thought that I couldn't see because of the bandages on my eyes. So I didn't realise I was actually blind until about a month after I was shot. My brother Noel, he took me for a walk up and down our back garden, and all along, as I say, I thought the bandages were preventing me from seeing. And so he took me for a walk this particular day, and he said to me, "Do you know what has happened?" And I said, "I knew I was shot." And he said, "Do you know what damage was done?" And I said, "No." And that's when he told me that that I would be blind for life, you know. And to be honest with you, I accepted it there and then, you know, until I went to bed that night and was in bed on my own. I cried for the one and only time about blindness that I remember, and I cried because I realised for the first time that I was never going to actually see my mummy and daddy again. And you know, I often say, like, you know, to a 10-year-old boy, I suppose you don't think about the bigger things in life. You don't think about getting a job. You don't think about your education. You don't even think about what blindness means for you for the rest of your life, really. All I felt was this enormous sense of loss. I was never going to physically see my mum and daddy's faces again. But you know, but after that, you had to be getting on with the rest of your life, really. And you know, tomorrow always comes, as they say, and the next day came for me, and I had to get up and out of my bed and start to lead life as a blind person. I would always say that day was the first day of the rest of my life as a blind person. And it probably really was, because then I was starting to deal with the fact that my eyesight wasn't the lack of eyesight wasn't a temporary measure. And you know, I do believe that, you know, there's a lot of things helped me adjust to blindness that you probably could never plan, really. One of the things is the fact that I was 10 years of age, and maybe at 10 years of age you don't fully realise what blindness means, and you don't have an adult reaction. Like if you lost your sight now, then you would have an adult reaction to that, which was probably much more devastating than, say, I had as a 10-year-old boy. So I was a child, and I responded to it like a child. And so not knowing the seriousness of it, not taking on board the consequences of what it means for the rest of your life, potentially, then I didn't have all those sort of emotional reactions to that degree. And then, you know, the fact that I was a 10-year-old boy, or the fact that I was blinded by the British Army, in a strange kind of a way, it helped. Because overnight, I was very popular. And people used to come to meet me from all over the place, you know. The Bishop Daly coming to the house, John Hume coming to my house.
Right, yeah.
You know, the local mayor, people calling to see me in the house, you know, and I never knew. And then you had every journalist from every network from hundreds of countries across the world coming to interview me. And this blindness thing was actually good crack almost. It was positive, you know what I mean? So by the time the dust settled, and as you know, those things don't last forever, the time the dust settled and the journalists stopped and people stopped visiting and all that, I think that I had adjusted to blindness sufficiently that that left me in a position I could cope with whatever was coming my way. But, you know, I always say there's two sides. Broadly, there's two sides to blindness. One is emotional, the other is physical. And the emotional side or the physical side of blindness is getting from A to B and how do you do things. And thanks to the support from my family, from my friends, and then I was able to go back to my school that I was at. I went back to the Rosemount Primary School, then I went on to the local secondary school. You know, I was able to do all that because teachers facilitated me, because my friends facilitated me, and my family supported me big time. And, you know, I was able to lead a reasonably normal life. All right, I'm not going to pretend that there was times when I missed my eyesight. You know, like for example, I was a football fanatic. And when I would go out the street after come home from school or whatever, all the mates would be out playing football, and I used to have to stand on the sidelines basically. And quite often, I imagine what that must have been like for my parents, you know, because I'm sure, in fact, I've no doubt, they were looking out our window, watching me in the street. And, you know, for them to see their 10-year-old boy not be able to do the things he done a month earlier or 2 months earlier, and been on the sidelines of certain games and stuff as a child, it must be very difficult, it must be heartbreaking. And so, but I sort of try to mix the best I could, you know, and try to, you know, maybe if there was a free kick in the game, the boys would have let me come on and take it. If there was a penalty, they would have let me come on and take it, you know, just to make me feel part of it, you know. And all right, it almost seems like silly in a way, but in another way it was just very important for me.
Which football team do you support?
Back in those days, I never really had a football team. I kind of used to get all the wee cards, you know, with different footballers on them and all that sort of stuff. But I suppose Celtic would have been the team that I kind of was aware of most, and that was primarily because my aunt lived in Glasgow. And
they would have just won the European Cup a few years earlier.
Aye, but I wasn't entrenched in, you know, I used to watch the World Cup and stuff like that, or, you know, TV matches and loved it all. You know, I'm privileged that I've actually saw Pelé play football, you know, on TV and all that sort of stuff. So I loved all that, but I wasn't really tied into any one team. I hadn't developed that sort of affiliation at that stage.
Yeah.
Obviously, in later years, I became a big Derry City fan, which I still am.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, as I say, the physical side of blindness, you know, would have been the most challenging. You know, and I think, you know, I did take things like panic attacks after being shot if the army was near the area or there was a foot patrol in the street. Sometimes I would have took a bit of a panic attack, you know, or if there were an army Saracen nearby, you know, Land Rovers, I would have taken a bit of a panic attack. Yeah. You know, there was a time I couldn't have sat in a chapel like this without taking a panic attack. Okay. Because the echo used to kind of disorientate me. Okay. And so all those things, it's all just newness, strange, different environment, blindness. And then of course this emotional side of blindness, but I don't think the emotional side of blindness with me clicked into later in life. Okay. There are times in my life when I miss my eyesight. There is, like for example, you know, when my two daughters were born, I have two daughters, Neve and Enya, and like when they were born, I was there in the ward when they come into the world for the first time, and I couldn't see them. And you know, when they made their first communions and their confirmations in the Craigan Chapel, and you know, they walked up the aisle in their beautiful dresses, and everybody telling me how lovely they looked, and I couldn't see them. And just recently, well, in the last couple of years, my daughter got married, and you know, I had to walk her up the aisle in a sense, and you know, she was there in her beautiful wedding dress, and I always knew that day would come, and you know, I found those things difficult, and I always will. I'll always find moments like that where eyesight matters, you know, difficult. I couldn't, you know, my daughter, you know, 26, 27 years of age, you know, a big day in her life, big day in all her lives, her getting married, and you know how important it is to a girl when she gets married and how beautiful they look. And I would just love to have seen her. I would love to have seen them when they made their first communions and confirmations. And I've accepted the fact that that's going to be the story of my life. There's going to be times in my life when not being able to see is going to be emotional. And I'm not afraid of it. I understand it's going to happen. And I think I'm glad to say that it's momentary, because I have the ability to sort of see the bigger picture. You know, using the example of my daughter getting married, I was there, I was able to give her away. I was able to share that day with her and take part in the ceremony and you know, enjoy what every other parent enjoys with their children. But there's just some wee things that you will miss that will never be the same. You know, even things as simple as photographs. Like I've lost both my parents now, my mommy and my daddy, and quite often when I'm visiting my sisters and stuff, they would be getting out photographs of my mommy and daddy. And the only photographs I have is my memories. I can't look at a photograph.
They would describe what they look like.
They would, and even they were just talking about, God, there's Molly Gardens and there's my daddy, look, sitting on the back step of Molly Gardens and so, and you know, I would love to be able to see it. I genuinely would. But it's just a reality, so that's the way it is.
In our interviews, we've interviewed lots of people around the subject of forgiveness, and for some people, they've very clearly said, no, we wouldn't forgive, we can't forgive. And then others are very strongly say, yes, I forgive and I forgive. You've spoken about that, I know. I mean, can you share with us a little bit about what that word means to you and what that journey was like for you to kind of think about what forgiveness could be like?
Well, I was kind of in my, let's say, my young adult years. I went to school and got my exams, went to university. I was compensated by the British. With half the money I bought a house, the other half I bought a pub. Then I had bought a second pub, and so when I came out of university I had two pubs. I went on there was an office above one of the pubs, and then I run my own business. You know, and then I learnt the guitar after I was shot and played in bands and stuff like that. I had a recording studio. So I, at one stage, you know, I began to reflect on my life really. And, you know, I used to wonder why I was so happy about blindness. Why I never even thought about blindness. I was just so happy and content. And, you know, I boiled it down to a number of things. Like I boiled it down to the fact that I come from a good family. Boiled it down to the fact that I come from a good community. And I also acknowledged the fact that, you know, that despite the poverty and despite the troubles in Northern Ireland, I was still able to go to school and get an education for myself and make a life for myself. But then, you know, it was only really around the year 2000 when His Holiness the Dalai Lama was in Derry. And I was in the audience at an event here, a very small event in Derry. And His Holiness began to talk about forgiveness. And it was only really he began to talk about forgiveness that I began to think, he's describing how I feel. And it just registered with me then. What I was actually experiencing in life was forgiveness. And I suppose what he talked about and what I would talk about now myself is, you know, like, forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is about you. It's about your ability to understand and let go of the pain and the hurt that was inflicted upon you. And why would you want to do that? And the reason why you want to do that is because it kind of frees you up to move on. It frees you up to begin to live a contented life. If you're racked with anger and bitterness and hatred, then that has to be an obstacle to your ability to live a full, happy and contented life, and particularly to find happiness. And, you know, I think everybody wants to be happy in their life. And I think that, you know, that it's in our own hands on many occasions to find happiness. And there's probably a whole lot of ways that I haven't thought of that you can be happy in life. You know, some people think it could be more money, could be a better job, could be more holidays, could be a bigger house, could be a better car. And I do think all those things do contribute to you being, say, happy in life or whatever. They contribute. But I don't think they're the significant factors at all. I think how you feel inside And I think forgiveness, particularly for people that have been badly hurt, is a great way to begin to sort of deal with what's happened to you. And I do think if you're going to try and reconcile, you know, within yourself, with the person or the people that hurt you, then I think it's got to start within yourself. Forget about the individual, forget about the other side. What they think and feel actually, in my view, doesn't matter. What matters is how you feel. And if you can begin to reconcile within yourself, then you'll be much happier. Now, I know there's all sorts of challenges around it, and all sorts of thought processes around it. You know, some people over the years have said to me various things, like, for example, does it let the other person off the hook? You know, the straightforward answer to that is, how does it? How does it let anybody off the hook? You know, if you're within yourself beginning to find a way that you can let go of the anger and the hurt, the pain that you feel, and begin to forgive the person, then how does that let the person off the hook? I don't know how it does, but I don't believe it does. The other thing that people have said to me that, you know, does it justify? Are you in some way justifying what the other person does? And I think it's a mistake to link forgiveness with justice. They're two different things.
Okay.
You know, Charles, the soldier that shot me, blinded a 10-year-old boy. That's wrong. It's wrong under any circumstances. There is no justification for it. Charles broke the law that day. Morally, he broke any moral law that you can think of. So what Charles did that day was totally and utterly wrong. So, but I forgive him. Does that mean it's right, what Charles said? Of course it doesn't. There are people forgive people every day of their lives for doing things that are wrong. Okay, they could be smaller things. We forgive our children when they do something that'll hurt us. When they do something wrong, we forgive them all the time. Does it justify what they did? Of course it doesn't. Like if your child went out today and threw a stone and broke the window of the next door neighbour's car, I'm sure you could forgive them for doing it. But does it mean it was all right to break the window? Of course it doesn't. And it's the same thing for me.
And you met the soldier, Charles, is that right? Can you tell us about that and how did that happen?
Well, I mean, I was always curious about the soldier. You know, the thing about, you know, the conflict in Northern Ireland, security and all that, you don't know very much about the person that carried out. I didn't know anything about the soldier. It was just a soldier to me. I knew absolutely nothing. And I was curious about him. And the other thing I would say was, I felt like I was in a relationship with him. Because like the most significant thing in my life was being shot and blinded. The person I am, the things that I've done with my life, you know, has been dictated by that incident. And when you peel everything back, there's only two people involved, and that's me and the soldier. And so whether we liked it or not, that rubber bullet connected us. And but I just felt I was looking into a shadow. And I had built up this image in my head of this 18-year-old soldier in an army lookout post on the edge of a no-go area, basically frightened out of his life, barely a child himself.
He was 18 when he
No,
shot you.
that's my image.
That was your image of him, right?
Yeah. And then I discovered, when things relaxed, and I found out the soldier's name and that, that when Charles shot me, he was a 34-year-old captain. And that was a bit of a mental adjustment, it was. There's no point in me pretending otherwise. I mean, I did get a shock when I realised this was an adult, a highly trained captain in the British Army, and, you know, he shouldn't even been firing a rubber bullet. But that took me maybe a 24-hour period to sort of get my head around that a bit. And then we met. And
How old were you then when you met him?
well, it was 2005. So what do we see?
Long later on in life.
33 years
you're an
after
adult
that.
by then, yeah.
So I was 43, let's say. And I flew over to Scotland and met him in a hotel near the airport in Edinburgh. And, you know, it was an amazing experience, really. You know, it was the end of a 33-year-old mystery, first of all. It was, you know, getting to meet the man that caused so much hurt and so much pain to me and my life. And like, one of the things that was very important to me was my mommy and daddy. And they went through a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of tears after I was shot. And you know, their injury, I think, was every bit as bad as mine, if not worse. And, you know, for what they had to experience.
Yeah.
And you know, so going over to meet the soldier, I felt I was carrying their journey. I was carrying their story with me too. And it confirmed a lot of things that the Dalai Llama used to talk about, confirmed a lot of things that I believe in. And that is, you know, behind every terrible act, there's a human being. And Charles was a father, he was a grandfather, you know, he was a husband. He cared about them, you know, and in that regard, when you can separate the action from the actor, when you can separate the deed from the person who carried out the deed, then you can begin to sort of think, well, what you did was bad, but you're not a bad person. And I suppose what I began to realise was, you know, sometimes good people do bad things. And if you can get behind or past or in some way circumvent the bad thing, then it's potentially possible to reach through to that person and for that person to reach through to you. And that's where I think me and Charles connected. And you know, that day, that 4.5 hours or 4.75 hours that we sat chatting was an incredible experience for me.
Wow.
I think I got more out of it than Charles did. You know, because like, you know, it was just so fantastic. Not only to be able to forgive somebody, but to be able to tell them you forgive them. And another thing about forgiveness is like, you know, it won't change the past. The fact that I forgive Charles won't give me back my eyesight. Won't take away all the hurts that were caused. But it allowed me to move on with my life. And, you know, again, I realised that day when I was sitting with Charles, that in many ways I'm sitting here and able to meet you as a human being because of forgiveness. And, you know, and it provokes all sorts of thought processes, because like, people used to say to me that they wouldn't have met Charles unless he said sorry. But I didn't put any preconditions in meeting Charles. I didn't ask him to say sorry. and I didn't make it as a condition that he would say sorry. And I knew Charles 6 years before he apologised.
Wow.
And if in those 6 years, if he had been sitting here with me and you now, and you had asked him, was he sorry? He would have said no. But 6 years after it, he said sorry. So what does that tell you? You know, it just tells you the potential of not setting any preconditions. The people need to, sometimes the perpetrator needs to go on a journey too. And Charles had to go on a journey with me. And all right, I facilitated that journey. And no victim should ever be obligated to forgive.
No.
No victim should ever be obligated to start that journey. But if he can, and that's why I talk about it, the last thing I would want is anybody listening to this podcast or video cast feeling that they're a lesser person because they can't forgive or they should forgive. Not at all. If you can't forgive, it's totally understandable. But if you're looking to find some kind of peace and you can't find it, if you're struggling with how you feel, then forgiveness opens up an opportunity for you. It's one avenue, and there's probably many others, but there's one avenue open to you that's fully in your hands, that you can maybe begin to deal with the hurt and the pain or the cloud that's over you. And forgiveness is possibly that way to do that. So, you know, I tell my story and talk about forgiveness in that context. And I'm really lucky and blessed that I feel that way because I didn't have to work at it, Johnny, you know. I didn't have to work at it. I got it from my mommy and daddy.
It's amazing, Richard. I think of kind of I suppose as a quote or the strategy of Martin Luther King was not only to aim to set the oppressed free, but the oppressors free too. And it seems to me like what you're describing, you were already had been liberated. You know, you're kind of a free man, but you were maybe with Charles even able to help him become more free. Is that right?
Aye, well, you know, at the time I didn't see it that way. I used to wonder where the soldier was. I used to wonder, did he ever think about me? But I never really thought that maybe in some way he was shackled by what happened. And, you know, Charles was retired an army major. I genuinely believe that he has that sort of stiff upper lip. And, you know, how does a conditioned soldier deal with, say, atrocities that they be involved in? And one of the ways is, in some way, just by, developing a shell, a hard shell, by turning your back to the wind, by developing a mentality that allows you to release yourself. But then, I don't think you ever fully escape that. And I think when you look at Northern Ireland, for example, there are many people in Northern Ireland who carried out awful atrocities on all sides of the community and all sides of the conflict. How do you escape that? Like you can hide from the public, you can close your door and close the curtains, but at the end of the day, all of us know what we did in life. And I just think, if I done something like that, if I hurt somebody, I would love them to find it within their heart to be able to forgive me. It's not going to fix it. It mightn't even fully make me feel better, but it might in some way make me feel a bit better. And, the fact that Charles eventually moved to the point where he said sorry to me, that to me is important.
Yeah.
You know.
Did it mean anything to you at that moment when he said the words? Like, what
We were actually sitting in a hotel in Derry here. And, you know, we were talking about the whole sorry thing because we were doing a talk the next day. And it always comes up, and I honestly knew Charles was sorry. He just couldn't say it. And I was trying to help him sort of deliver his message a bit softer because I think he looked very bad when he used to say in a public arena, you know, he used to say something like, no, I've never been asked to apologise, nor do I feel I need to apologise. And I used to think, Charles, you're a nicer person than that. You know, why do you have to say it that way? So I used to try and sensitively manage his PR a bit. Because it wasn't about me making him look bad, and it was about people seeing the good side of him. And so anyway, that night we were talking about it, and I said, Charles, the sorry word will probably come up tomorrow, so do you want to give it a wee bit of thought? And he says, Richard, I am sorry. And I have to say it was a complete shock to me when he said it. You know, I nearly fell off the chair. And it did mean a lot. I didn't think it would mean as much to me as it did, but it did mean a lot to me. And I think it's because, one, I never expected it, and two, I never asked for it. So it was really nice when he said it. And when you set down a precondition, I'm not going to talk to you unless you apologise first, then that allows that person to hold a key to a chamber in your heart or in your mind that only that person can release or unlock. So because I didn't have that, then I was able to meet Charles freely. He had no control over how I thought. So I was able to beat him, and saying sorry wasn't necessary. And then I think that disarmed Charles. And I think Charles initially didn't know what way to handle me because probably didn't know my motivation, didn't know where I was going with all this. You know, there could have been an element of mistrust. I don't know if there was, but there could have been. That maybe I had ulterior motives for meeting him. You know, was I going to try and take things forward legally or something?
Right.
I don't know, but it allowed me meeting him allowed an element of trust and friendship and openness to build up between us. And
Richard, I think what's remarkable about your story is not only everything you've just said, but that you then kind of later on in life you kind of were able to transform yourself, not just from someone who can be at peace with the past, but really trying to change the future. And you set up a charity, Children in Crossfire. And can you just tell us a little bit about the charity, and how it came to you to set it up, and some of what you do with that charity?
Well, I was in, I suppose a couple of things. I acknowledge in my life the things that made the difference. You know, I already mentioned my family and that, I already mentioned community, and I talked about, you know, despite the poverty, I was still able to go back to school and get an education. And I kind of, in my young adult years, I began to think, you know, when I was running my own business and that, I began to think, you know, every child, no matter how difficult the circumstances might seem, given the right level of support, given the right opportunity in life, can grow and blossom and contribute in a positive way. So I remember doing the walk in Mississippi.
Is it a Trail of Tears?
Yeah, I was a fundraiser to help children in Somalia at the time, and I was just working my own business at that stage, but there's an organisation in Dublin called AFRI, and they were organising this thing, and the Trail of Tears was basically reenacting a walk carried out by the Choctaw Indians in America back in 1831 when they were put off their lands, and half the nation perished on their way to Oklahoma. But I don't know, 17 years later or so, they heard about the Irish famine, and they fundraised and sent money back to Ireland to help the Irish at that time. So this walk, that was kind of the backdrop of the walk, but and it was kind of to highlight, look, that was unjust then, but you still have injustices going on in the world today, especially allowing children to die from hunger, and that type of thing. So I went out and did that walk, and during that walk, I began to think about my own life and began to think about what I want to do. And I suppose I began to realise that I began to feel that I would like to use my story and my blindness in a positive way. And if I can use my blindness, and not the blindness so much, but the fact that I'm an example of how so many people have made a difference to me, then it would be good. So I made a decision to come home and sell out the business and set up Children in Crossfire. And Children in Crossfire work today in Tanzania and Ethiopia. And we kind of work with children who are caught in the crossfire of poverty. Children that wake up every day and don't know where their next meal's going to come from, don't know what, if they don't have access to clean water or medicine or anything like that. And I suppose our main entry point in the any project is early childhood education. So we focus on children under 6 years of age mainly, trying to provide access to preschool education. But in doing that, then, and what we do there, is we build classrooms, we train teachers, we provide classroom resources. But as well as that, it's very difficult for a child to learn if a child is hungry, or a child suffer from malnutrition, or some waterborne diseases like diarrhea and vomiting and stuff like that, from drinking dirty water. So we try then to tackle some of the issues that impact on a child's health. So I would say our main focus is education and health. And so we're doing that now 25 years. And it's really rewarding work.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I just wonder, we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation. I just wonder about your faith and what that has meant to you, and how you've found that over the years. I mean, we say this almost every time. The title of our series is Guardians of the Flame. Guardians of the Flame. Religion can be something that can be warming and comforting, or it can be something that can become toxic and burning. And it seems, from what I kind of gather in your life, there's some real faith that's brought peace to you, but also kind of inspired you in some way. Is that right? How would you describe the faith dimension of your journey?
I mean, I think that when I talk about forgiveness, for example, I think that came from my parents. And I think their faith was enormous. You would have never seen my mommy without her prayer book. My mommy talks about the hours that she spent sitting in the chapel, asking God for help. And, I always talk about, the various things that helped me in my life. The fact that, as I say, I support from my family, support from the community, been able to go back to school and get an education, and I talk about forgiveness. But there's also a very important factor that I can't ignore, and I call it kind of the X factor. Something that you can't put your finger on precisely. And I think that is spiritual. I think, without a doubt, God has played a big part in my life in terms of helping me be the person I am, giving me the personality that I had, and the ability to cope and deal with things the way I have. And, I would always say, it's not the power of my prayer. I think it's the power of my mom and daddy's prayers. that move the obstacles. And I do think that your faith helps you every day, really. And maybe the older you get, the more you realize that that connection with your faith, whatever it is something that keeps you grounded, keeps you focused, and that's the way it's been for me. And so I certainly can't ignore the presence of spirituality in my life, you know.
And can you tell us about the Dalai Lama? It's not every day I meet someone who's met the Dalai Lama. Can you tell us a couple of stories of your interactions with him? Seems to be a very humorous guy.
He is. He's all of that. You know, the Dalai Lama for me is what we all should strive to be. You know, and he's somebody that has experienced, him and his people have experienced a gross injustice that he's forced to live in exile. But despite all of that, all that provocation, he continually puts out the hand of friendship. He continually talks about the only way to deal with the injustice in his life, or in all our lives, is through peaceful means. And I just think that that's an amazing example that we all should try to be. I also think that he communicates in very simple terms, and sometimes he makes a very complicated things sound very simple, and he says in very simple ways, you know. And but he is very humorous, and you know, he jokes with me about fancying my wife and all that sort of stuff, you know. And he used to say to me, "Oh, you know, you can't see your wife, but I can," you know, all this sort of stuff, you know. And so he does. I think he values humour, and he knows the importance of humour in terms of communication. Like, he's a brilliant communicator in that way. And you know, but the Dalai Lama has come to Derry and Ireland here at my request on a number of occasions. Now, what world leader would do that? All joking aside. I mean, world leaders respond to world leaders. They don't respond to some guy like Richard Moore sitting in Derry that wants to invite you over. But I think the Dalai Lama values people more than anything else. So, and what I've learned with him, it doesn't matter if you are President Obama, Richard Moore, or whoever. The way he treats you and the way he treats everybody is exactly the same. And he said, film stars, he said, you know, presidents and kings and across the world who all want to meet him. And at the end of the day, he values every human being in the same way, and that's what I've noticed about him. He would walk past you. I remember way back when I met him up in Belfast, and it was just after I met him for the first time, and he had sort of been very much into my story. And I was invited to a thing in Belfast, and the Dalai Lama was arriving in City Hall, and I was in the room backstage. There was about another 100 people backstage, and there was a British minister there to meet him coming in to the room, the Minister for Victims at the time. I think it was Adam Ingram. And so the official people were there. The Dalai Lama walks into the room, and he spots me because he met me the day before. And he made a beeline right across the floor and sat down beside me and began to talk to me. Now, I was in shock that he was treated me like that, because I'd only met him the day before, and we had chatted for a good half hour, an hour the day before. But he come and he sat beside me to the point where they had to eventually interrupt him and say, "Your Holiness, can we introduce you to the minister here?" That is not the Dalai Lama pretending to be anything. That is who he is. You are as important to him as anybody else in that room. And I think that's one of his greatest values that quite often people don't pick up on.
I'm just kind of, I don't think I've ever quite put it like this in an interview, but I'm just sitting here talking to you, and I feel like, in a country like this, in Ireland, we're in Northern Ireland, politicians are the way they are, and there's tension at the moment. Maybe at the moment, like, there's more tension in the world of obviously the pandemic and stuff, but just a sense of insecurity about the future. And I feel in you a kind of just a real warmth, almost like I feel like you could just grab all the different sides together and give them a wee talking to, not in a telling off way, but just an encouraging way. I mean, I'm just wondering what do you have to say? I mean, to this country for a start, where we've had so much trouble in the past, and even around the world where there's tensions emerging, migration and populism and nationalism, and what do you have anything to kind of, as we just conclude the interview, like just to almost give this kind of perspective from your life, words of advice? Or
I think we've got to take responsibility for who we are. And quite often, I think politicians don't take responsibility for who they are. And they don't take responsibility for what they say. And I learnt a long time ago, and I learnt it from my mommy and daddy, that what they say influences me enormously. And you can't separate your words from other people's actions. You can try to pretend that happens, but the reality is that you can't separate your words from other people's actions. You can't separate how you behave and how that encourages others to behave. And where we've all got to take responsibility for ourselves, I think we've also got to take responsibility for how we influence others. And that's where I would say to politicians, for God's sake, start taking responsibility for what you say and what you do. Because there is somebody out there who thinks or believes in every word that you say, who thinks that what you're saying is what they should be doing. And we talk about, say, Stormont. And I would say this to any individual: forget about Stormont. Forget about politicians. If you want to have real reconciliation, they don't hold the key to that. You do. And you've got the responsibility to find reconciliation. If we're going to be reconciliation in the community, or reconciliation in your street, or in your family, it's going to start with you. I remember when I was a young boy and had my eyesight in the Craigan. Now, you're talking about Craigan Estate, all white people. And one day, this black person came down our street. And me and my mates all saw him, and we found it extremely strange. And of course, we followed him. And the guy must have thought, what the hell? How do I get rid of all these things following us, following me? Then many, many years later, after I started Children Crossfire and I was blind then, I went to Africa. And I remember standing in this remote village and children kept coming up and touching my hand. And I was told afterwards, I thought they were being affectionate. I was told to come up to check if the white came off, right? But it was only then that I realised how strange I looked to them. And I remember thinking about the situation in Craigan at the time, where it was role reversed. Now I was the only white person in this village. But their colour of their skin never occurred to me when I was in Africa. I never thought about that I looked different until after it happened. So what does that tell you about blindness? it, to me, I think we make too many judgments on people by how they look, if they're different. And one of the greatest things about blindness for me is you see the person first. I don't know what colour your skin is, Johnny. There's a camera crew around us here. I don't know what colour their skin is. And it doesn't matter to me. And that's how simple it is. That's how simple the whole thing in Northern Ireland. If I'm a nationalist, it's because I was born a nationalist. If I'm a unionist, it's because I was born a unionist. John Hume used to call it an accident of birth. But yet and all, we allow it to divide us. We're a lot stronger and more intelligent than that. We can understand that, you know, that we shouldn't allow that accident of birth to divide us. We shouldn't allow an incident in our life to continually divide us. And, you know, and the only way that's going to change, I think, is in your own heart. So when you look at my incident, the important part is not being shot and blinded. The important part is what's possible and what happened as a result of it. My children met the British soldier that blinded their daddy, and they're as friendly with him as I am. If I had been an angry, bitter man, I think they would be angry and bitter too. And is that what we want for the world? So I think all of us have got to take on that responsibility. And I suppose for me, it's about responding to situations, not just with the head, that you respond with the heart. And you know, I do believe that if you engage your heart when you respond to difficult situations, then you will respond very differently. And I suppose I think we've all got to focus on educating the heart, really.